my sort of finger in the air prediction for end of year is probably 140, 150 by end of the year, with some pops, increases, and then consolidations.
2021, El Salvador President Bukele made the announcement of legalizing Bitcoin as legal tender. Last year at the Nashville BTC conference, Donald Trump, who hadn't been elected by then, he made the announcement that should he be elected, he would implement into executive action a strategic Bitcoin reserve. What can we expect this year on a similar scale? Bitcoin has once again surpassed $100,000. It's climbed more than 20% just in a matter of days last week. So we'll talk about what's next. Some projections peg Bitcoin to reach above $200,000 by the end of the year. Some analysts I've spoken to say that this is the top for Bitcoin as a recession is coming. It's going to bring down all risk assets, including cryptos and Bitcoin. So where does our next guest stand? He is D. Lewis. He is a CFO of BTC Inc. We'll be talking about his outlook for Bitcoin, the crypto landscape, and also the upcoming BTC Vegas conference. A lot of headliners that you don't want to miss, including White House officials. VP JD Vance will be attending. So we'll find out what the White House has cooking for the Bitcoin community this year. Welcome to the show, D.
Thanks, David. I appreciate you having me on.
Really excited to be covering the BTC Vegas conference in person in a couple weeks in Vegas. And thank you guys for inviting me. I'm looking forward to it. We'll be talking about the headliners and some of the messages that people can expect, so you can give us a bit of a teaser. But first, let's talk about Bitcoin. This is from Tim Draper, legendary VP and VC rather. He went on the news recently and he gave a projection for Bitcoin. He said that this is going to be a great year for BTC. $250,000 by the end of 2025 was his projection. And then he says within a decade, Bitcoin will replace the dollar dominance to become the standard currency. 10 years, something like that. Once I can buy my food, my clothing, my shelter, pay my taxes, all in Bitcoin. And it's a better way to collect taxes. For sure, there won't be a reason to hold on to any dollars, and Bitcoin will be the primary source of owning wealth. He said that could happen within 10 years. And then by that time, after a decade, Bitcoin will be infinity against the dollar because there won't be a dollar. All right, I'll get you to respond to that.
Oh, all right. Well, I will say on the price prediction, I probably, in terms of what I maybe agree or disagree with, I'm probably closer with Tim. And first, I'll say Tim's way smarter than I am, but I'll agree with him closer on that price prediction. I'm not that high. But I think, it's hard for me to see on such a short period of 10 years that, I don't see the US dollar, frankly, going anywhere. I would say, if you look at some of the political landscape right now, they're leaning heavily into stablecoins and, stablecoins as an instrument to proliferate US dollar, and unless we're on the precipice for some serious hyperinflation event for the dollar, which I think would be catastrophic for everybody, I would have to respectfully disagree with that timeline around the dollar going anywhere. I do not see that happening.
Would you also disagree with the notion that once I can buy my food, my clothing, my shelter, pay my taxes all in Bitcoin, and it's a better way to collect taxes? I mean, you brought up stable coins. Most transactions, well, not most, but a big chunk of B2B transactions on the blockchain are through stable coins, not on Bitcoin. And people have their reasons for that. Do you agree or disagree with the notion that Bitcoin is going to be a global medium of exchange?
Not any. I mean, I think that for most Bitcoiners, including myself, that's the aspiration over an undefined longer time horizon. Mm-hmm. But I think the part I struggle with the quote here is that it's hard for me to see the U.S. government allow, because I think that's ultimately the buffer is paying taxes via Bitcoin. I don't see that happening in terms of, once you can pay your tax with it. I actually think that's sort of a buffer that threatens the US dollar to a degree. And I don't see the US and the politicians, willing to give up that reserve currency dominance. So if you can't pay your taxes with Bitcoin, you're going to need dollars to pay your taxes because you have to pay your tax or else you go to jail. So I don't see that happening. But although buying food, clothing, other goods and services, I think that will increasingly, it's not today, but I think over a time horizon, people are going to see the value of Bitcoin and prefer that they get paid in Bitcoin relative to US dollars.
Do you think there's anything superior to Bitcoin in the blockchain that could serve as a medium of exchange?
Well, I would say right now, stable coins are definitely, taking Bitcoin behind the woodshed as a medium of exchange. I think largely in part because of the notion around volatility. I think while all Bitcoiners, including myself, have aspirations for Bitcoin to kind of proceed along the evolutionary pathway from store of value to medium of exchange, there's some hurdles, right? The volatility is hard to contend with relative to a stable coin. And then you also have the notion around, in some countries, including the US, capital gains tax that you have to pay, right? Nobody wants to have to calculate the cost basis when they're buying a coffee. You don't have that problem with the stable coin. So in terms of what's superior today, I can totally understand the argument that a stable coin is a more convenient way of processing a payment on the blockchain relative to Bitcoin. But I think over time, where Bitcoin beats a stable coin is that stable coin is still subject to the same debasement that the dollar is. And I think that's where Bitcoin will end up winning.
Let me ask you this. Personally, would you prefer to take your salary or any sort of payment in either, here are your choices, Bitcoin, a stable coin on any rail, or fiat?
So
Or fourth option, any other crypto?
So for me, for me personally, it would be actually, I'm going to introduce a fifth option, like a
Okay.
hybrid.
Okay.
I would take a portion in Bitcoin, a portion in US dollars. And the reason is, and this is actually not dissimilar from how we do business at BTC Inc. We do get paid in Bitcoin from certain sponsors, from certain, conference attendees who pay in Bitcoin. And that gives us a very organic way of dollar cost averaging on our own treasury and our own balance sheet into Bitcoin, whereby the vast volume that people pay is in dollars, but we can use Bitcoin as almost this treasury savings asset. And I would say the same thing for me personally. So my preference would be, because I have a lot of dollar denominated liabilities, the same way BTC Inc. does as a business. Rather than introduce the friction of getting paid entirely in Bitcoin and then having to sell some of it, I would kind of, want to apportion it based on, what I can kind of use for savings and put away and dollars that I need, readily available to, pay the mortgage and all the day-to-day things that life throws at you.
Going back to what you said about politicians not wanting Bitcoin to replace the US dollar in terms of dominance, that makes sense. So I want to get your take on what politicians are planning and whether or not there's going to be a shift in that attitude that you just referenced. This links to the conference itself. I noticed, first of all, anybody who noticed or who goes on the speakers list will notice a very heavy White House presence this year. So you've got JD Vance attending, Bo Hines, Executive Director of the President's Council of Advisors for Digital Assets, the crypto czar, David Sachs, Senator Loomis, who's been a proponent of Bitcoin for quite some time. She's also working on a Bitcoin strategic reserve bill. And then you've got the Trumps going, so Eric and Donald Trump Jr., and then a host of other senators as well, Tom Emmer, Trace, no, not Trace, sorry. You got a U.S. Justice, Jim Justice, U.S. Senator going. Senator Bill Hagerty is going. And of course, members of the SEC, so Commissioner Peirce, who have had on the show before, she's going. A heavy presence from politicians. I'm assuming they're not there to bash Bitcoin.
I think the only one that may be there to bash Bitcoin on the entire list is Peter Schiff. I think.
Okay, right. Peter's also going. There you go.
Yeah, but I think, your assumption's correct for sure that these politicians or folks that are connected to the current administration are there to advocate for this space. Definitely just based on the things that they've already stated to date.
Do you know, or can you give us a teaser on what kinds of messages these higher profile politicians are likely going to announce at this conference, or at least just a general theme, guide us towards what we can expect?
Yeah, and I was kind of looking at like some of the panels, and I think what's interesting, and this is kind of relevant to stablecoins. There is one panel with, I believe it's Tom Emmer and Bill Hagerty, so
Yeah.
the two congressmen, and their panel is entitled "Stablecoins: Separating Money and State" with a question mark. So I'm really curious. Right now, like that's as much sort of like public information as we have. Is like the panels are released. Anybody can review the program and see what these speakers are going to be talking about. So I believe there's going to be a lot of discussion around sort of stablecoin regulation. That also tends to be the hot button issue in Congress right now. I think a lot of us hope that to get a little bit of an update around the strategic Bitcoin reserve that that was initially announced in Nashville by Donald Trump at our conference last year. I think there's supposed to be an audit, and I believe that audit should now be completed around how much, frankly, just the big question in the room: how much Bitcoin does the U.S. government actually hold, and have we verified that? So, it would be exciting to get an update there. I because I'm just the bean counter and I just pay the bills, I don't get all the juicy secrets and all of what's going to be talked about. So I'm going to be on pins and needles, David, with I think everybody else in there. But that's what I suspect it to be, at least from the political speakers, is discussion around stablecoin regulation, discussion around the Bitcoin strategic reserve, as well as some policy right now. I think I saw in the news, Cynthia Lummis in particular is working on a bill to counteract, I think, the Inflation Reduction Act that has this sort of 15% alternative minimum tax right now that would actually be, not be good for these Bitcoin treasury companies, because their unrealized gains could be subject to this 15% alternative minimum tax, which was, I think, an unforeseen consequence. So hopefully they talk about that, because there's going to be a lot of, Michael Saylor and MicroStrategy is going to be in the room, and there's a lot of other Bitcoin treasury companies. So yeah, that's the general spectrum of what I think we'll hear about.
Well, actually, let's go back before we talk about what's going to happen next. Let's just go back and give the audience a sense of history of how important some of the announcements that were previously made at this conference were. So in 2021, El Salvador President Bukele announced, I believe, there was a series of announcements made around the time, but he specifically made the announcement of legalizing Bitcoin as legal tender at the BTC conference in 2021. Last year at the Nashville BTC conference, Donald Trump, who hadn't been elected by then, he made the announcement that should he be elected, he would implement into executive action a strategic Bitcoin reserve, and we know that was signed into executive action, so he kept his promise. So major announcements by politicians have been made at this conference. What can we expect this year on a similar scale?
Yeah, what's so fun but challenging about playing these conferences is, day one, when the event's done, we all look at each other and say, well, how do we top that one?
Yeah.
Right. And so in terms of the announcements, in terms of the speakers, so it creates an interesting challenge. So, in terms of what could be announced this time around, in terms of how do we get a juicier, how do we get a more momentous announcement than, the most powerful government on earth looking to accumulate Bitcoin is going to be a challenge. Now, I will say I'm really intrigued by JD Vance speaking, as obviously sitting vice president, because he's different from Trump in that he Trump, I think, is new to Bitcoin. I think it's very fair to say that he's kind of understanding what it is and kind of warming up to it. JD Vance, he's already on record of holding, I think, public holdings of about $250,000 to $500,000 Bitcoin. So JD Vance has already been a Bitcoiner. So I think it's really going to be exciting to hear from JD Vance as somebody who, already has been a Bitcoiner, even before Donald Trump, became interested, to hear, his thoughts, his ideas, and his, future for, America's vision and how it relates to Bitcoin. And then I also think it's interesting because JD Vance, he's younger, right? He's a millennial. It seems very likely he's going to be the torch, carrier for the GOP potentially for 2028. So I think, that is just I don't know what he's going to say, but these are the reasons why I'm extremely interested. And I think what he says will be extremely momentous, just because of, who he is and, who, he potentially could be going forward and shaping what Bitcoin's future and America's future is, tangled together.
How do you think the messaging and the sentiment this year, not just from the politicians, but from the crowd overall this year, will be different from last year?
That's a great question. I think, I think one of the bigger differences is, the price right now, we're encroaching all-time highs. Although I think Nashville, which was July of last year, I think we were just kind of maybe similar. So I think we're under the all-time high as well. We're obviously now higher this time around. I think, there's going to be a heavier conversation around twofold. The institutional adoption. Now we have, a full year under the belt with all the ETFs, and we have just an increasingly accelerating Bitcoin adoption on Bitcoin on corporations' balance sheets. That's accelerating tremendously. And I think also there's a lot of sort of conversation in the Bitcoin sphere, maybe this is a little bit niche, on just upgrades, like technology upgrades to the protocol itself, and even sort of this ongoing debate between arbitrary data on the blockchain versus just monetary transactions only. So I think the conversation, it still has some political overhang to it, but I think it's going to be a little bit more balanced, and there's going to be a lot more talk amongst the institutions as well as what's going on the actual technology front with Bitcoin.
Going back to your Bitcoin forecast, what is your personal view for the Bitcoin price for this year?
Yeah, so as a CFO, right, I have to be a little bit more tempered and a little bit more cautiously optimistic with my forecast. I think right now, the prices run up pretty well. I think we're in a cool off period. I would expect some consolidation, a little bit of sideways action, probably for the next, let's call it 2 to 3 months. I would say the macro headwinds are kind of turned to tailwinds right now. The sort of tariff conversations seem to be kind of progressing in a positive way. I think we just saw inflation print in the US coming under expectations. So I think there's going to be even more pressure to see the Federal Reserve potentially cut rates, which has always coincided with, positive momentum for the Bitcoin price. So, just laying out the future, my sort of finger in the air prediction for end of year is probably 140, 150 by end of the year, with some pops, increases, and then consolidations. I don't think we're taking the elevator to 150. I think it's going to be more of a step ladder for sure. But that's my finger in the air prediction.
Okay. Also in the news, Coinbase is now in the S&P 500. It's replacing Discover Financial, which is a company it's acquiring. That's big, having a crypto exchange join the S&P. Is this the beginning of a larger trend here? What's happening?
Absolutely. And I'm not sure how much, folks are really kind of appreciating the significance of that, because now when you think about all the passive investing through the S&P 500, all the people that don't care maybe anything about Bitcoin or crypto, that all of a sudden now they should care a little bit, because they may not realize it, that their portfolio now has exposure to it, direct exposure. And I do think it's a trend, because I think, Coinbase is today. I think MicroStrategy is tomorrow. I think estimates are as early as maybe next month, potentially, that MicroStrategy, I think if the Bitcoin price holds these levels, it'll clear a hurdle that will enable MicroStrategy to be probably number 2 to join the S&P 500. And, that is accretive for the Bitcoin price and all the other Bitcoin crypto companies out there that trade that way. So who knows? It could be a potential flywheel component to this.
MicroStrategy is basically a proxy for Bitcoin for institutional investors. And so if Strategy joins, I think it's called Strategy now. They changed their name. If Strategy joins the S&P 500, that's basically a Bitcoin proxy joining the S&P 500. But another company is joining the ranks, hopefully, in doing similar things. Cantor Equity Partners disclosed $458 million Bitcoin acquisition. So 21 Capital is the firm that is being launched by Jack Mallers and a consortium of other partners, including SoftBank, Tether, Bitfinex, and I actually had Jack Mallers on the show talking about this. People can check out links down below. But anyway, they've recently disclosed a $458 million Bitcoin acquisition plan as part of a pending merger with 21 Capital, backed by Tether, Bitfinex, and SoftBank, like I just said. So when I spoke to Jack a couple of weeks ago, they had just filed, and now they're disclosing an acquisition. So walk us through how significant this is and whether or not this could be similar and or different from Strategy.
Yeah, I mean, this is massive, right? I mean,
by the way, Jack Mallers is just sorry to interrupt. Jack Mallers will be speaking at the conference alongside Howard. Not Howard. Brandon Lutnick. Yep. Howard's his dad. Brandon Lutnick is going to be there, chairman of Cantor Fitzgerald. His dad is the U.S. Secretary of Commerce. But anyway, I'll let you continue.
No, I was to say that this is absolutely massive. And, it's interesting when Strategy, and I'm still getting used to the name change, but yeah, when Strategy first embarked on this, kind of similar to when we saw nation state adoption with El Salvador, everyone was very excited. And then everyone was like, all right, who's next? And I think Strategy announced, and then there wasn't nobody really showed up. It was kind of those things where it was maybe a wait and see. These things take time. And now I think with this announcement and what 21 Capital is embarking on, I think the floodgates are going to start opening up quite a bit for this sort of like corporate adoption. And I mean, talk about an initial first torpedo, because I think that buy puts them at the third largest holder for corporate amongst Bitcoin corporates right off the get go. I think just behind Strategy and I think Mar Holdings. So yeah, I mean that's definitely a way to make a really big entrance. And it wouldn't surprise me that by the time this deal closes, that they'll already have surpassed Mara. And once they close, they're already number two behind Strategy, which I think right now all the corporates that are looking to add Bitcoin to their balance sheet, it's a fight for number two. I think people have kind of understood Strategy's got a pretty commanding lead. I think everyone should aspire. Of course, it doesn't hurt to aspire to be number one, but it's going to be a fun race for number two, which I think is going to be very positive for Bitcoin and positive for those very interested in the Bitcoin price.
I understand why institutions would need this, but just from a retail perspective, let's take you and me, for example. Let's just take you. Would you rather buy Bitcoin, or would you rather buy a Bitcoin proxy vehicle like Strategy?
It's a great question. I think for most Bitcoiners, myself included, I mean, I would rather own the asset, right? You would rather own the asset that everyone else is fighting to try to get, right? Now, I will say there is reason and rationale, of course, for people to buy the proxies. And I think what's going to be interesting as that the proverbial floodgates, as I described, open for corporate adoption is as it gets saturated, investors are going to look to see like who's different and for what reasons why. So, you can't just run this playbook and do what everyone else is doing and go, just be a copycat, because you'll get kind of lost in the fray. So I do think, companies that are looking to advance Bitcoin adoption, education, those that are standing out, that are serving, the underlying asset and its proliferation in a positive way with Bitcoiners, I think there's a reason for people to put their money behind them, advocate for those types of companies. But, for me, given a binary choice, I mean, the underlying asset is king.
What have I told you if I were to show your chart? Let's just take, I'm just using Sailor Strategy as an example. So just over the last year, Bitcoin's up 67%, Strategy's up 237%. Year to date, Bitcoin's kind of flat because it's already started a year very high, and then MicroStrategy's up 37%. Over the last 5 years, 3,000% versus 1,000% on BTC. You get the idea. It's a leverage play. So would you use this as a leverage play, or would you just lever yourself?
Yeah.
Or do you care about leverage at all?
Well, yeah. I mean, and for me personally, it's kind of the lens on how people look at Bitcoin. I sleep easier knowing that I have my Bitcoin, I have it custody, I don't have it through a third party now.
Yeah.
To the extent then I'm incurring a discount relative to what I would have probably incurred via like a proxy like MicroStrategy.
Yeah.
That's maybe the trade-off, and maybe it's a steep trade-off on based on certain time horizons, but yeah, I mean, for me, holding the asset is key, and I think. There's certain things you can do when you hold it that you can't do when you go through a proxy. So there's some advantages that beyond just sort of price appreciation that you kind of have when you have self custody of it.
Okay, excellent. Who are you personally looking forward to the most? Or you don't have to give one name; you can give a few at the conference in terms of speeches and announcements and panels.
Yeah. So, Ross Ulbricht is definitely, it's hard for me to think of anyone higher on that list. Ross Ulbricht, founder of the Silk Road, just like somebody very early on in the history of Bitcoin, now having been recently pardoned by Donald Trump. That's one of the promises that Trump had made at the Nashville conference. That was another promise that President Trump had kept. That's just a tremendous full circle moment. There's, countless people that are involved in that effort. And I think it's a great moment to celebrate, to see him on stage. And so, I'm really much looking for that. Arthur Hayes is going to be there. And I actually think he has the same price prediction as Tim Draper. He also has a $250,000 year-end price prediction. Always love to hear Arthur's takes and understand, what his sort of thesis is behind that price prediction. Dylan LeClaire will be there, and he'll be talking about, institutional adoption and Bitcoin yield. So, someone always great hearing about. And I think the conference closes with Saylor in addition to, I think Ross is the last speaker, but Saylor right before him. And, Saylor's always can't miss. He always gets people going and excited about, his sort of predictions and what he's doing with strategy moving forward. So those are probably my top 4 or 5-ish panels that, I'm going to be working. So it's going to be hard, but like those are the ones I'm definitely going to make sure I take a break to catch.
Excellent. What else can people learn about the conference? What should people know in advance?
Oof, I mean, it's packed and loaded. So I definitely want to refer people to the website, which you can find either via the social handles, which is if you use X, it's at the Bitcoin Conf. Tons of information from now until event day is going to be released there. And then I believe the URL is b.tc/conference. So, going to be a lot of information, but the things that I would tell people, listeners right now is, in addition to all these panels, one of the exciting things that we're embarking on is we're looking to set the Guinness World Record of the most Bitcoin transactions in a single location. So that's going to be very exciting. We're actually be handing out what are called Bolt cards. You can think of them almost like credit cards that have Bitcoin loaded on them. So we can enable that. And so, come be a part of history, come set that record. That's not a BTC Inc. record. That is going to be a record by all of the attendees who, commit any transaction there on the showroom floor. And yeah, there's going to be so many, side events, after parties. This is very much a opportunity to network, to meet other people, to understand, what's going on with Bitcoin, to hear historic announcements. It's also time to celebrate, right? Bitcoin is over $100,000, and we want to make sure that Bitcoiners just have a little time to unwind, because there's no better place to do that in Las Vegas.
Absolutely. Okay. Well, yeah, there's also chapels there. If you meet your wife, you can just go get a shotgun marriage. I kid.
Right.
Yeah. D, thank you very much for coming on the show. Fantastic. I'm looking forward to the conference, and I'll plug my own link down below. You can use my link and code to get 10% off tickets. So I'll see you there, D.
Yep, David. Yeah, I appreciate you having me on and looking forward to seeing you there as well.
Thank you for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe.